Almost a century ago, someone that's very important, whom you've never heard of, Myles Horton, graduated from college, having seen the exploitation of poor factory workers during his experience. Myles Horton was one who, 4 years later, co-founded an innovative school for leadership called the Highlander Folk School in the mountains of Tennessee. The Highlander Folk School was an informal school of leadership and trained some of the most prominent labor rights and civil rights leaders in the United States. It was at the Highlander Folk School that Rosa Parks found inspiration in a workshop just 4 months before she sat down in a white section of a bus in Alabama, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott. When asked what Highlander meant for Rosa Parks' leadership, she replied, "Everything." Horton saw that this informal school could be an incubator for leaders outside of the formal educational system, where people could come together with their communities and they could solve problems together and they could learn new strategies for social action. Since the days of ancient Greece, there's been a quest to figure out a way to train people to be good leaders. We're still on that quest, although our scope of who can lead has broadened. I wish I could tell you as a leadership educator that I've found a secret way to turn students into leaders in the classroom, but I can't. I tell my students that I can teach you a lot about leadership, but ultimately you're the one that's going to need to take the risk and test these ideas out in your experience. I've found that there's 3 hidden schools of leadership that aren't usually a part of one's formal education. Horton found a way to meaningfully combine all 3 of these schools. But other leaders find different ways into these schools. And these schools are the School of Purpose, the School of Solidarity, and the School of Adversity. The School of Purpose teaches us to take ownership and to follow what moves us. Well over 2 centuries ago, a British college student entered an essay competition on the pressing issue of that day of slavery. Although he was training to be a pastor, the winner of that competition, Thomas Clarkson, was so moved by his research. He was so horrified by slavery that he made it his life's purpose to abolish slavery throughout the empire. He was so taken by this that he got down off his horse on the way to London and committed himself to this calling. And there's a monument outside of London commemorating this. Horton found the School of Purpose through his own curiosity, through his empathy, and through his values. It's very rare that good leaders start out trying to be good leaders. Instead, they connect with what they care about, with what they love. They connect with their sense of responsibility. For Clarkson, it was about connecting to the suffering of people he'd never even met. So the School of Purpose, we listen to our lives and we listen to how we want to serve other people, whether we feel ready or not. Making a lot of money is not a purpose. It's a means. Becoming very famous is not a purpose. It's an outcome. Finding personal fulfillment and happiness is great, but it's not a purpose. It's a byproduct. Purpose is other-centered. It's a relational school. The second school, the School of Solidarity, teaches us to connect, to collaborate, and to have compassion. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, New Zealand's youngest female Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, grew up the daughter of a policeman who negotiated. She would watch her father negotiate with groups like motorcycle gangs in her neighborhood. She was also exposed to the poverty of indigenous and refugee communities right around her. She had a history teacher who challenged colonial narratives and who also supervised a group called the Human Rights Action Group, whose members wrote letters to fascist leaders around the world. So, when a mass shooting occurred in Christchurch in New Zealand, killing 51 people, Ardern had a voice as Prime Minister that expressed empathy and compassion. She got New Zealanders to come around the Muslim community. She said in a press conference, "They are us." And she also found a way to pass legislation to ban automatic weapons because she'd been to the School of Solidarity. The School of Solidarity begins when we open ourselves to being known to other people, when we belong to a community, and when we widen our circle of who belongs. This is where we listen to the stories of others and open ourselves to others and what they have to teach us. The third school, the School of Adversity, it teaches us that the way we tell the stories of our lives matters. It's hard to imagine the struggle for human rights and the struggle for freedom under communism here that led to the Velvet Revolution without the playwright turned president Václav Havel. But the key moment for his leadership came in a moment of failure. Just after starting Charter 77, a human rights document pushing against the communist regime here, he was in prison and gave in to his prosecutors, saying that he would refrain from any further public activities. So he gave in and was released from prison. He was so devastated by this rejection of what he had been about his whole life, that he made up his mind that he would redeem himself by a frenzy of activity that he knew would get him thrown back in prison. And part of that activity was writing the famous essay that I hope you read called Power of the Powerless. So adversity became productive when Havel was later telling a different story about his failure, when he was owning his failure as his own and taking responsibility for it finally. In my leadership classes, I asked my students to go and interview a mentor or a role model of theirs. Only I don't want them to find out about how their mentor succeeded. I want them to find out how their role models experienced a moment of failure and how they processed that. And they come back with some surprising answers to that. They come back realizing that their mentors learned how to respond to their emotions in that moment, how they learned to depend on other people, how they learned to take a back seat, and how they learned to become more generous. Leadership is not easy. If you want to change something, people are going to experience loss, and adversity will come. I found these 3 schools of leadership when a mentor challenged me to go live among poor communities in developing parts of the world instead of going to graduate school, which I was really thinking about at the time. I gathered a team of 4 people and we traveled and lived in India, Kazakhstan, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Brazil for a year. We just went to be learners. That was our mission. I found purpose in teaching Ugandans about leadership and learning from their culture and their challenges that they shared with me. I found solidarity in the Tibetan refugee community in India and in stories of people like Dawa, who's pictured here with me, who escaped the persecution of Maoists in Tibet, across the border in India, through the mountains, only traveling by night. It took him about 3 months to get across the border to India walking. And I found adversity when I was living with my team in a furniture-less apartment in Kazakhstan. And we were committing ourselves to reconciliation and working through conflict together. I still draw on these experiences as if they were some sort of curriculum drawn up for inciting people to meaningful action. Leadership is not a trophy. It's not something that we try to achieve to make ourselves feel better. Leadership is a relationship. It's a process of making people's lives better. There's a need for leadership all around us, and you are all eligible. If you are attentive in your life and you take the opportunities in your experience to go to these 3 schools, you don't have to find leadership. It will find you. Thank you.